right. So this evening, we are an evening in Singapore. So depending on where you are joining us, so a warm welcome again. And we will be talking about a topic that it's interesting because there's a lot of debates about it. So it is on learning style, whether it is in fact, real that we all come with a unique learning style, or is it really a myth as many people say it is, and many researchers and scientists. So I think it's an important topic because we know that, for one, kids do learn differently. And if it is a myth, then how should we view this entire topic? Yeah. So before I get into the topic proper, so allow me to do some quick introduction if you're just logging in right now. So I am supported by my team of panelists, and they will be helping me with answering questions. Do feel free to put your questions on the Q&A platform if you have any questions that come up at any time, and we'll assist with that. If you want to know more about our panelists, you can visit their profile on our website. And we do have Thai interpretation going on this evening, so thank you to Woody who's translating for us. So do switch over to the Thai channel if that is helpful for you. So I'm Cheryl. I'm the speaker for this evening. I'm also the founder of BrainFit. I'm actually trained as a physical therapist and have been working with the brain for many, many years now. So I'm also an author and a mother to two girls. So I've, firsthand experience in nurturing brains. So BrainFit was started in Singapore about 20 years ago. And we offer cognitive training programs through our learning centers. And we also work with partner schools. So these are the different countries we are located in. And here you can see some of our centers in the different locations. So we run enrichment programs for children from as young as 9 months, all the way to adults and also seniors. We also run preschools in some of our locations. So here you can see some of the students engaging in activities in the different locations. So we have won some awards, Best Cognitive School, and also are affiliated with a group of, world-renowned scientists and partners. So we won't go too much into that. And let's get started with talking about what I personally think is an extremely interesting topic, just reading about it. So I hope that you will enjoy the session, as much as I have enjoyed, putting the content together. Now, to get us started, I want to run a poll, right? So if you're with me on Zoom, we'll pull up the poll in a minute. There are 3 questions that I have on the poll, right? So every child or student has a unique learning style, whether that is a fact or myth. So I think it's always nice to hear, what my audience are already thinking. And number 2, teachers should adapt teaching to the learning styles of students. And number 3, a learning style is a fixed characteristic of an individual and it's present from birth. Let me launch the poll right now. And hopefully you can participate. Don't worry about right or wrong answers. Yeah. So we're not tracking any of that. So if you could just kind of tell us what you think. So every child or student has a unique learning style. So that is the first question. So do you think, it's a fact or myth? I mean, this is a topic we will be trying to explore tonight or today. And so that's my first question. Second question is, teachers should adapt teaching to the learning styles of students, whether you think, that should be the case or you think otherwise, yeah? And number 3, a learning style is a fixed characteristic of an individual, unchanged, you're born with it. So do you think it's a fact or myth? Thank you for your participation. We've got about 50% of the audience who have participated. We'll just wait for just 10 more seconds or so. And then we will share the results, yeah? All right, so we're running for about a minute now. I will end the poll right now. Thank you for your participation, and let me share the results. Okay, there we go. So about 80%, close to 90% of the audience, right, think that it's a fact. So we have our unique styles in learning. Question number 2. 80%, close to that, of our audience think that teachers should adapt teaching to the learning styles of students. And let's look at the last question. More than 80% think it's a myth that the learning style is a fixed characteristics of an individual present from birth, right? Okay, so we will be exploring these few points today. And we will begin with looking at whether or not people, in fact, have learning styles. So just a quick definition. Learning style refers to the idea that each student learns in his or her own way. So it refers to the observation that, you know, people may have a preferred way to absorb, process, comprehend, and retain information, which is really the learning process, right? You've got to understand, process, and then you have to remember. So the idea of learning style stems from really believing that we are different, right? And now, if you look into the history a little bit, I think the discussion that people have uniqueness in their learning goes back a long way, but really as a concept, right? And I think the VAC model is a good starting point. So this is developed by Neil Fleming. He's a learning theorist. So that was in the year 1983, where he was kind of like framing the idea that, okay, you have differences in learning, right? Let's kind of like build a framework so that we can understand the differences better. And so you can see the VARK model was born. So VARK, so each of the letter will represent one group of learners. So he describes learners who are visual learners. So people who learn by seeing. So they like charts, graphs, you know, graphic organizers, you do outlines. So you're more pictorial kind of, images work well for you. Then you have the A group, which is auditory. So for this group of learners, you know, you like to listen. Yeah, you're tuning in to audio information, and you find that it's easier to retain verbal instruction. It's good to discuss. It helps you to process and also remember information, right? You might like to read aloud so that you have the additional sound reinforcement. Then R represents the read and write group. Yeah, so people who like to read, right, like the materials in the code in the written form, and that helps them to process and retain. And then K is the kinesthetic group, right? Where they are the hands-on people, right? You learn by doing. So these learners, all right, so they use their body in the process of the learning process, and it helps them to process, right, and engage with the material better so that learning is more successful. So this was what Neil Fleming described as the VARK model, which I think is kind of like a more formal starting point. But certainly the idea has evolved over time. So if you now do a Google search, right, you might see the VARK model. Some people will drop the the R, yeah, so VAK, right? It's often subsumed under auditory, right? Your language, you know, your kind of auditory or reading is kind of the same network. So you might read about VAK, yeah. But of course, you know, there are people who might describe more than that 3 or 4 styles, right? So including whether you are musically, you know, kind of oriented, whether rhythm helps you to learn, whether you're a social learner, a solitary learner, or you're a combined learner. So, you know, different kinds of descriptions have evolved over time. So depending on what website you land on. And I must make a note that I think the idea of learning style is really closely related to that, the concept of multiple intelligence. And so Dr. Howard Gardner from Harvard, so he was the one who kind of developed the concept of multiple intelligence. So his idea was that, you know, you can't use one IQ score to define everybody, right? So we are not just like one score and everybody's got to have that score. So from his point of view, and again, it's very similar, it's the observation that we're just different. Yeah, and it's really an attempt to kind of conceptualize, to streamline the varied observations, I think, the efforts of these educators and researchers, right? So Howard Gardner had described 8 distinct intelligences in people. Now, quite close, you know, to some of the learning styles that we shared earlier. So he talked about people being picture smart. So that would be the visual group, right? Word smart. So that might be the auditory or the reading group. Body smart, right? The kinesthetic group. Or reasoning, yeah, or people smart, musical smart, nature smart, self smart, great self-awareness, yeah. So he described these, and he also said that, look, you know, it is not that we all become categorized into one neat pocket, right? So the belief is that we all possess some intelligence from each category, but it's just to different degrees. So I may be more kinesthetic, right? I may not do so well in word or in picture. So art may not be my forte, but I'm really good, with sports, right? And compared to all my other friends who are different. So it's really an attempt to describe what we already see in real life, right? And at that time, remember, this was in the 1980s, yeah? He also kind of like suggested that, these intelligences will be located at different areas in the brain, right? And this was pre-brain scans, right? Because if you look at the history of neuroscience, there's a big transformation and revolution in the middle of 1990s where these fancy brain scan machines become a form so that we can look into the live brain. So at that time, it was also a lot of guesswork. So however, when we had the brain scans and when we put people in the machines, scientists didn't find 8 cognitive structures in the brain, right? So the idea of multiple intelligences kind of fell out of favor a little bit, at least among, people, in the psychological or neuroscience world who follow the research, because they couldn't find it and associate that with what we were seeing on the brain, right? Like you didn't have an area that as a nature smart area, right? And but I think that doesn't nullify the efforts, that we are different and the recognition that we are, right? And making a really, really great attempt in explaining, how we can all be talented in different areas, right? So what are the neuroscience discoveries then, with these machines that we now know? So instead of 8 areas or 9 areas in, distinct areas of intelligences, what scientists found was the 5 core pillars that are really important, right? And for example, they didn't find a math area, but we know that math intelligence is located, is shared, it's a shared area by your visual, by your movement, spatial, also your frontal, right? So while that doesn't exist, like a mathematical area, we know that there is mathematical intelligence in the form of a network of connectivity, right? But in terms of distinct areas where the brain cells are more specialized, you do have a visual area at the back of the brain, an auditory area at the side, a movement or spatial area, around the top of the brain, and then a focus or your executive function in the front and your emotion center deep inside the brain. So there's kind of these 5 areas that are described a lot more these days, whereas then you talk about connectivity among the 5 that supports different functions. But the fact is that everyone has unique brain skills, right? So this brain is born differently in babies, right? Some babies have greater connectivity in certain areas and some babies have less. And that gets carried over, into adulthood. And of course, the early formation is from our genes. Whatever genes that we inherit forms that initial profile, and then the environment acts on that, right? And we know that whatever is in the brain affects our capability to learn and also our intelligences. So these are real discoveries, yeah? And so I have a picture here. So you can see this is from Professor Aaron Babé. So in his lab, he was studying human intelligence, right? And this was published in the year 2012. So he described intelligence, and this is general intelligence, like IQ, right? It depends on the brain's ability to integrate information from the verbal at the side, visual, right? Spatial, and executive processes. So again, the 4 areas, apart from emotions, are described. So it's really that connectivity, the degree, right? So some of our brains connect really well. So you may find that, scoring high on IQ test, problem solving, understanding abstract concepts, and seeing patterns come easy for you. But some of us may have a brain that's not that strongly integrated in the different areas, or each of the areas may not be as fit. And then we find that these tasks become harder. So we are different because of the connectivity, the structural makeup of our brains, right? And each of us has a very, very unique brain. And that creates that uniqueness that, we saw and that scientists attempt, to make sense of. Right. So here you are. So at the very real level, apart from, brain scan. So at BrainFit, we run cognitive assessments, right? So it's a cognitive profile. So this is how a cognitive map brain profile might look like. It's a 7-year-old. Actually, this belongs to my daughter, right? When she was 7, right? Your test was done. So if you look at my daughter, right, Isabel, she's 9 this year and she's in primary 3. So you can see that, and again, within each visual area, there are a lot of sub areas. So our brain's complex. So when we talk about visual as if, we're good in all of visual, it's not that. We might be good in certain areas, but weak in other areas within the same area. Okay, this is how complex the brain can be. So you can see, definitely for Isabel, her auditory is stronger. So the blue and the green, blue is the best, green is high average, and then kind of orange and red are weaker areas. And focus is not one of the strong things. Yes, right. And so I'm a mom too. Even though I work with the brain, so this is what Isabel has. And at 7, right? And you can see it's unique. And her sister would have a different profile, right? And here you can see another 7-year-old. So you can see here is another profile on the right, right? And this is actually a friend of Isabel's, right? And this child is clearly superior in attention and focus than my daughter, and also in visual processing, but a relative weakness, right? Certainly in auditory. So you have 2 kids, and I can tell you both these kids are doing fairly well in school, right? But they're doing well, with different brain foundations. So if you look at them, you'll think that, okay, they're equally bright. But if you look at something like that, then you know that this is just a behavior, but underlying what is driving what you're seeing, that, okay, they're doing okay in primary 3, right? No great challenges. You're seeing that, Isabel is supported strongly by the ability to process what she hears. She loves to read. Whereas, our friend, has great attention capabilities, and also visual processing is a lot stronger. Yeah. So there we go. Yep. So here are the strengths, right? So so behaviorally, you probably cannot pick up differences, but these will become more and more marked as the children grow. You'll find that, Isabel might be gravitated more towards kind of language arts, whereas the other child might be moving more towards a mathematical kind of work, right? Because their foundation, it supports success in those areas. Yeah. And then, of course, the relative areas for Isabel. And then, our friend is, it's just opposite, right? But 2 kids happy, doing well, and nothing, differences that you really cannot pick up. But through a profile, you can see these differences. So how do you know then my child's learning style? This, often is kind of related. Okay, if I have a style, then what is my child's style? Yeah. So you can do a formal assessment like what we do. Yeah. Like an assessment that we did for Isabel and her friend. And so children from 4 years up at BrainFit, we're able to get a nice cognitive profile in all the 5 brain pillars that we described. Now, the other way would be, if you are not doing a formal assessment, then observe closely. Yeah. So we observe, right? We look out for areas of strengths and weaknesses when they perform different things. Yeah. So is the child strong in expressing their thoughts in different words? Do they have a rich vocabulary, for example, right? Are they, artistic? Do they like kind of subjects, or activities related to visualizing and all that? You do have to note a few things, right? Often when you observe, you want to see clusters of behaviors. For example, untidy handwriting and carelessness is a cluster. Why? Because both these activities require visual processing, right? So you need to watch your spaces, as you are, doing your handwriting. And callous, could be also, you have to scan, with your eyes very carefully, right? Your visual attention. So if you lose that, right, that visual sharpness, in terms of processing sharpness, I'm not talking about eyesight, right? But of course you have to check eyesight, yeah? And so it belongs to a cluster. So if kids are manifesting kind of like weaknesses or strengths in certain related behaviors, then it gives you clues. Yeah. Now, you also have to be careful in the area of kinesthetic. I think often there is misunderstanding. People think that as long as you're active, you're kinesthetic, right? That's not often the case. Now, when we talk about a style, like you're kinesthetic, it means it is a superior channel, like the graphs that you saw, the blue and the high greens, right? Really supporting, your activity and your performance in a particular area with all these, brain fitness connectivity that's scaffolding and supporting the activity. Yeah. So children who are very active, may move a lot because they are compensating for weak sensory motor processing. So it doesn't mean that kids who move a lot are naturally kinesthetic. He needs to move to learn. Of course, some of them are, but sometimes children move a lot. Their sensory motor systems is weak, right? So it is not a superior sense. So they may not necessarily learn better by moving, right? So I think that's just something we have to be aware of. And also, research has shown that self-reported learning styles are not always accurate. Like if you ask my daughter, right, what's your favorite subject, or like, which enrichment class do you really like? She will tell you art. She loves her art class, right? Or the engaging, in artistic activities. But visually, for visual arts, right, we saw on that chart, she is clearly not strong. Yeah. So sometimes, and that's where I think it gets, confusing as well, because a lot of times with the research, we depend on individuals kind of reporting their preferences, right? And then it doesn't gel. So, but the reality is that, it doesn't gel because we might not always be aware. I mean, she still enjoys art, right? I mean, even if, she may not be the best artist, but the process is enjoyable for her. Yeah. But certainly, compared to another child who's stronger visually, it's more likely that, Isabel's performance is going to be underperforming. Yeah. Because you can see, it's just not a forte, compared to the auditory area, for example. All right. So that's the first poll. Now, the second question that I had in the poll earlier was that teachers should adapt teaching to the learning styles of students. And again, a huge number of our audience think that that's the case, right? I mean, what's the point of, knowing about your style, if you ignore that and then you just teach as if one size fits all? That's not going to make sense, especially we observe people are different, and we can't pretend that it's not there. Yeah. Okay, I'm just going to throw this right out there, right? This is unfortunately a myth. Yeah. So a lot of research has been done. Yeah. There is very, very weak evidence. In fact, no evidence it's really been questioned very heavily, and it is not new. It has been questioned for a long time already. There's no evidence that teaching according to students' learning styles benefits students. Now, I pulled out this paper. This was from Theory and Research in Education. It was published in the year 2015, right? And the title is Learning Styles-Based Instruction Effective? So this was a comprehensive analysis of recent research on learning styles. So if you read the abstract, it talks about an influential publication in 2009, right? Cognitive psychology, a group of cognitive psychologists, revealed that there was a lack of empirical evidence. So that was in 2009. So then this group in the year 2015 decided to then update and look at what's gone on, right? So I've just highlighted here at the bottom. Results reveal that the more methodologically sound studies have tended to refute the hypothesis, and that a substantial divide continues to exist, with learning styles instruction enjoying broad acceptance in practice, but the majority of research evidence suggesting that it has no benefit to student learning, deepening questions about its validity. All right. So it is a huge topic, I think, in some countries more than others, where there are really people that are saying, hey, there is no evidence, I mean, if you look at the really good research that has been done, right? And then they look at, do the kids learn better? Are the grades showing better grades? They're not seeing that, right? But at the same time, you have surveys asking teachers, right? Is this something that you think helps you in the classroom? And they say yes. And if you research parents, they say yes. Just like, the same kind of research that we saw earlier, right? We had about 80%. And this is exactly what research shows, about 80 to 90%. Yeah, or people believe that it helps the children. So here you can see, therefore, the two camps becoming quite adamant, so that because we're talking about large groups of people, yeah, believing it, and then this group of scientists, they're saying that, hey, wait a minute, we are not seeing the evidence. All right. So so this is what's out there. But let's just, take one step at a time and say, okay, what does that all mean? Right. Okay, I'm just going to use the example of a sport because I think it helps us to understand. The brain is very abstract, but I think playing a sport, then it helps us to see, right? Which I think where the fundamental problem is. Now, if you're trying to help a child do well in basketball, I want to be an NBA player, right? What do you need? Right? Or you are a talent scout. What are you looking for? You're looking for great physical skills, right? You're looking for physical characteristics. What are you looking for? Stamina, agility, especially with the hands, left hand, right hand, right? Eye-hand coordination, obviously, spatial awareness, etc., etc. Speed, you need lots of things, right? But you go out and measure these people and then pick up the talents and then have them join your team, right? Now, if a person doesn't have this skill, I'm not agile. I don't have the stamina. I can't catch a ball. I have poor eye-hand coordination. So then how can you help this person succeed? By adapting your teaching. So you still have to do basketball at the end, right? So if you change your teaching and saying that, okay, let's do training. Let's not do, you don't have good eye-hand coordination. Let's skip the eye-hand coordination part. Let's compensate with something else. Can you get a good basketball player? I think it's really hard. You need eye-hand coordination, period, right? It's a required skill, right? Therefore, if you adapt and say, we let's not do this, let's use another system, right? Okay, the visual system is not good for you. Let's just concentrate on something else. You're still not addressing the fundamental needs of that subject that's required, right? So, for example, we talk about reading. Now, this was a slide that I had in my earlier webinar where I talk about facts and myths, in reading development. And we talked about the skills that you need to be a strong reader, right? It's the same, yeah? For any task, you have a set of skills that support that task in the brain. We don't see them. That's the problem, right? We need auditory processing. You need the sound of the letters. You need to then link it to how the letter looks like. A is ah, right? It's a little circle with a tail, right? C is like a semicircle, it's k sound, right? You need to process that really quickly, have your memory hold it. Now you need working memory by the time you are reading paragraph because you're connecting information. Now your eyes need to move across the page as you're doing that. You need to pay attention. Your ideas need to switch as new information come on the text. You've got to be flexible. You can't latch onto an idea, right? You can't be successful reading. You need to be fluent. You need to have language comprehension. So a child that's lacking any one of these, we can't bypass it, you see, by kind of like adapting to your style. So if my style is I can't process, I'm not auditory. But you need to be auditory in reading, right? You can't evade it. That's I think the issue, right? Therefore, adaptation doesn't help us to get to the root of the problem. I think it's the issue. Yeah. So let's look a little bit again. If you belong to one of these styles, if you have a student, a child who belongs to one of these styles, according to your observations, what does it really mean for school? Like how much adaptation can we truly do? Yeah. If you look at kinesthetic, right? Now, kinesthetic learning is most applicable in preschool years. We know that our kids move a lot, and that's the way they are, right? They learn. They learn when they're moving. Yeah, and that's why if we're stuck on home-based learning and remote learning, the youngest group of children are the hardest. We all know that, right? How do you run a preschool online class? Right? You can only give bite size, and you got to keep getting them moving, engaging. Otherwise, they won't sit still for you like a high school student would, right? So kinesthetic learners, right, has a great advantage, but unfortunately, by the time you get to formal schooling, the expectation is that you got to start sitting down, right? I mean, when you go into the classroom setting, because we are moving on to other kind of content. Visual learning. Now, early school experiences allow movement, but they also tend to be visually engaging. So that's why you see the early elementary classrooms. They are, beautifully decorated. If you're looking at a early reader book, lots of pictures, right? Attractive, colorful. Yeah, an apple. A red big picture right in front of you. Yeah. So And actually, students who are strong visual learners have a strong advantage in early school, right? You can have a very strong start if you are good in visual memory, for example. A lot of children can read very early, right? They don't even need to wait for the phonological sounds to be attached. They remember the whole words. Yeah. And they appear, very successful, early on. Now, be aware though, in order to be a truly good reader, the phonological part must be strong, right? You can't get away from the sound bit when you look at an activity like reading. Then what happens is that as you move into higher grades levels, auditory becomes a really massive instructional, a channel that information is learned. So if you're in a university, right, sitting in a lecture, your lecturer may only have one slide, but might be talking a lot through the lecture, right? And just using the one slide, and you have to be processing your information through the auditory channel. So you then start to see that some children who are strong visually, but then maybe weak auditorily, then start to dip as you go up to the higher grade levels, right? Especially you find, about 10 years of age, about grade 5 level, you might see that dip. And sometimes parents wonder, why have they lost motivation? But no, the expectations, right, in terms of the task demands is changed. So you need new networks, to be active in the brain. So I think that's where the clash a little bit is seeing that, some of the adaptation, like how do you do, you're trying to study Shakespeare, the nuances of language. How do you get a kinesthetic learner to be really successful in language nuances, right? We can act out the play, we can do lots of things, but it gets to a certain point where you need to be strong in that, just like playing the basketball game. Yeah. So I think this is really what we're dealing with, right? So then coming back to the example, then how do we really help our kids? If I'm a kinesthetic learner, then what does it mean? Is it a big disadvantage? You are right. It is a big disadvantage. So often, when we did run these profiles, I see kids with some of the strong systems, auditory is strong. I tell them they're very blessed, right? And some of them, have all the academic systems that are robust. And some of them, are quite unfortunate, it's not supportive of that. But school is school, right? Unless, of course, you go to a sports school, right? And that's why, we're talking about, maybe more varied content, more avenues, rather than just your traditional math and sciences and languages. Yeah, so these are the questions, and I think what the discussion, should be about. So in the case of the basketball player, so if the person still really wants to be good in basketball, then we got to go into the gym and build these skills. You got to have the stamina, run on the treadmill. We got to do agility drills, right? And we can do that. There are agility drills in the gym. We know that. You practice your eye-hand coordination. We build spatial awareness. Yeah, we really come in and then build the skills that is needed, right, to support the task, because this task need the skill, and that part, it's hard to change, you see, right? So likewise, that's what we are big proponents of this at BrainFit, right? We need to look at the cognitive skills. And the problem is that some of these skills we don't talk about. Nobody measures processing speed in our children. We should be, right? Nobody's looking at eye tracking. We should be, because if we do, right, and we can improve them, then you find that it can alleviate a lot of frustrations, and it can help us, get more success in some of these skills that are so important, but are very invisible. Yeah. So here you can see, right? So the science of learning is really about the invisible brain skills. So there's a lot of them, right? So just within visual, you have your eye tracking, to your perception, to your pattern recognition, to your automaticity, to your intelligences, etc. But they are all supporting what we see. So our academic learning. So what we have done is, because we see all these different behaviors, successes and failures, in school, and not just in school, also at the workplace. Some of us are better in critical thinking. Some of us are more creative, right? And then different job roles, will be more suited for us, and we can succeed better in specific ones. But the reality is that tasks require certain of these skills, right? So so you either come in to build these, or then certain change, you have to, and we have some suggestions, what else can you do apart from building those skills? So certainly building those skills is something we need to talk about. But the other approaches for a classroom teacher, I know we have lots of teachers in our audience, would be to think about two strategies. One's multisensory. In fact, multisensory teaching, and there's stronger evidence around that in instruction. It means that you actually use all senses. So you don't tailor to the style of the student, because every student benefits from learning using various modalities. So basically involving all sensory systems when teaching, so all your auditory, visual, kinesthetic, helps the brain. And there's research. Why? Because when you teach with a multisensory approach, the brain has more pathways, right? There's more feeding in of information, because it's coming in from various channels. And if one wasn't as fit for you, it can come in through the other channels, and it's integrated. So we want the connectivity when learning is taking place. So this is something that has been shown to be successful, especially for children with learning challenges, right? And this again has been researched in that population as well. So using a multisensory approach rather than tailoring to the style of the children, right? So engaging various senses is just a good thing. And number two is really differentiated instruction. Now, the concept is very close to learning styles, right? Learning styles is also talking about differentiated, right? You differentiate according to the style, except when we use this term, differentiated instruction, typically we talk about differentiation actually in three things. I've listed two. So what can you differentiate through? Speed, for example. Now, all children can learn, but not all children will learn at the same speed. We all can get there, but the current one size fits all, where we all have to do higher, algebra by this age, may be hard for some people and may be boring for others because they've gone ahead, right? So the speed is something we can differentiate, and for schools, they're able to do that. And of course, I think some of the research more with the older group of students, because we can use technology, right? Because it might be hard for the teachers to differentiate in the classroom, but technology can certainly help us cater to different groups, right? The AI in some of the educational systems, they've been designed for that. So they pace with the student, and then every child can succeed. At the same time, you can differentiate through depth. So how far do we have to go? In Singapore, we are introducing this more and more. So we now have foundational levels or more advanced levels, right? So if you're not ready for more advanced kind of learning in certain topics, that's okay. You just need to have a general understanding of that topic. Learning is lifelong anyway, right? Who needs to go into the depth of your intestinal system by 14, right? I mean, so and of course for some children that's fine, and they've gone far beyond that. All right, so when we talk about differentiation, rather than tailoring, it's more about the content still needs to be taught, right? But we can slow it down, we can change the depth. The other one would be, actually I didn't list down, would be actually content, in the sense that like we have the sports school, right? But even in the sports school, you need to do well in your language. I mean, there are certain core subjects that are fairly basic educational kind of processes that we need, right? So the languages, the basic math and sciences. So I think those are hard to get out of. But certainly if you have now a music stream, an art stream, right? And then that offers that varied avenues that then with whatever style you have, you can then be talented, and in that and be successful. All right. So I think, some of the arguments is really around that, how are you really differentiating? So I think that the intent that we tailor to the students is not a bad intention, right? Kids are different, but then the research has simply shown that, just using kinesthetic, introducing just a lot of movement for every class, just for the kinesthetic learner, might not necessarily help them do better, right? I mean, for the reasons that I have, attempted to kind of explore, right, and explain. Now, the third point is that a learning style is a fixed characteristic trait of an individual present from birth. Most of our audience think that, no, this is a myth, and you are right. Yep. So our brains is not a static organ, right? Our brain, the more we understand it, the more we think of it like our muscular, system, where, with training and effort and practice, you can improve performance, in specific areas that you're training for, much like your agility, your stamina, the different physical traits that we talked about. Now I will want to share here that this point is one of the most sticky points for people who are trying to yell at the whole world that, stop emphasizing so much on learning styles and stop teaching according to their styles, because a lot of people within the camp of the learning style believers actually do believe that, learning styles are fixed from birth, right? You inherit it and that's the way you are. Therefore, it's unfairly penalizing the children if you're not recognizing that, right? So this is from the American Psychological Association, APA, right? So well respected. They have an article in 2019 that says that belief in learning styles may be detrimental. Very strong words. But if you read it, you know that their concern is the belief that learning style is just a fixed trait. Yeah, because then you are placing a ceiling on the students. You're saying that, oh, you're a kinesthetic learner, full stop. And it's, we don't want to talk about people like that, right? Describing them or putting them in neat categories and saying that that's the way it is for life, right? So that's the concern, right? Where people have very strong language and speaking out against some of these. So when you go into that, then there's certain things that is accepted, but other things, that's challenged, right? But I'm so glad, our audience, I think you've been, those of you who have been following, our brain fits, and our kind of thinking, we know that the brain is clearly a muscle that we can work on. So we don't really believe in fixed traits, yeah? So so this is Isabel again. So you saw her, being quite strong auditory, right? It's serving her quite well. And so you can see, can I change her trait? Yes. So this was her 8-year-old profile, by the way, right? And she's due for a profile. She's not turned 9 yet, but she will be turning 9, right? So I do an annual profile, and of course I'm training her. And yes, I expect to make a visual area not a weakness, and attention not a weakness, right? You can train the brain, and with our friend as well, right? Our friend's training, and so visual auditory for the child, right? Yes, it's come on very, very strongly, right? With very methodical, structured, kind of tailored, personalized training, you can improve the brain, right? And not just at the cognitive level. So here you can see actual behavioral responses. I showed this in my last webinar where we talk about movement, the relationship between movement and learning. I talked about how handwriting can change for a child without really doing any handwriting drills. These children are jumping on trampolines. We're improving speed and control, right, of the brain. And here you can see the child, a 7-year-old child, moving up in its speed and handwriting, by the end of about a term, 2 terms, right? About half a year, you're seeing that, the speed comes up, even without the drills, because we are able to train, with exercises, processing to take place at a higher speed. Visual perception. This is actually a study that a project that we did in one of our schools in Singapore, right? So we had some writing kind of, this is the visual motor integration test. So the kids were asked to copy the images at the top. So you can see children at 9-year-olds, right? Not able to replicate the cube, right? And afterwards they were able to. This is just after 10 weeks. And we never taught the children how to draw a cube. So we don't teach content, but what we're doing is that we're sharpening the visual processing areas through exercises, right? There's targeting, your eye tracking, your spatial awareness, your spatial perception, your discrimination. And here you can see that correcting, quite naturally, just within 10 weeks of brain training, using a lot of movement, in fact, for some of our school projects. So, so behaviorally, so we have published a paper. This is one of our oldest paper that we published, when BrainFit first started. So it's about a 20-year-old paper, but we work with a local school. one of the popular boys' school in Singapore. And the children had attended about one term of brain training, right? And then it was a small sample size though, only about 8 students, or this was fully funded by us, right? About It's small, but we did it in quite a very careful way. So it was a randomized control trial. We have a control group of kids who didn't train, and then we had the 8 kids who came to us, for brain training. Again, we didn't touch content, right? We didn't teach math or English, but look at how much math, especially the blue, right? And this is a final year exams versus the mid-year exams, right? So this was the improvement per student. So math had gone up by about 50% per student in the group who trained, and the group who didn't train had improved by about 4% per student in the final year exams compared to the mid-year. So why did math move so much? Because we had one term and we focused quite a bit on visual and motor. So like I said, math is a very spatial subject. Yeah. So we see that. And again, English also improving better overall as well. Second language had a marginal improvement. And we had a paper, published by our Turkish partners. Yeah. And so this was on Turkish primary school children, looking at the attention span, right? And using our training programs. And we measured the attention skills, at the end of the program in the Turkish schools. And we saw that attention skills were stronger. This was again in a primary school in Singapore that, again, we work on some of these cognitive processes. And you see that we didn't have a control group. This was a paid project, but students who trained for more hours, showed, classroom that had more training hours clocked, had better English and math scores as well, by the year-end exams. So, all right. So I think so that would be kind of like the key important points, I think within this debate of learning styles there is. So just offering a summary, of some of these points and pulling all the thoughts together, right? Is that, is it true that every child has a unique learning style? Yes, we know that. If you have children, you will know that even the siblings are different, right? They have different preferences. They learn differently. They have different talents, right? And children have different unique learning abilities because we're not born with the same brain, right? It's not like a liver, right? Our livers work in the same way. Our brain, it's very unique, right? There's connections between different clusters of cells, and within each cluster, there's sub areas and connectivity and brain structure and density, right? Is something that we want. We want kind of like lots of brain cells. It's different density, right, in different areas. So that's why we have different abilities. All right, now the second point, right? So teachers should adapt. So this is where there's the most kind of debate and arguments, right? So teachers should adapt teaching to the learning styles of students. So clearly, if you look at the research, right, it's kind of in the myth category because the research is kind of showing that unfortunately it offers no great benefits. However, and I think, as an attempt to kind of explain what might be going on is that the specific contents just require certain networks to be robust. Like if you want to be doing well in math, your spatial processing must be strong. Math fundamentally is a spatial subject, and when we scan the brains, we see that. So if children are not talented spatially, you find that grasping of some of the concepts might take a lot of effort, and comprehension and solving math problems might not be enjoyable, right? So changing the style of your teaching may not get to the root of the problem, and therefore, may not be as helpful as we want that, which may explain why we're not seeing some of the results. But does it mean that we ignore individual differences? I don't think so. So I think it's really looking at what other avenues. So certainly at BrainFit, we are big advocates that you look at the brain capabilities because they are foundations and drivers for so many areas, not just academic learning, your behaviors, your social skills, ability to make friends and all that. So it's something certainly that we believe is important to look at. But at the classroom level, right, so multi-sensory instruction is more something that has been supported, right, with the evidence, and also differentiating your learning, right, through other channels such as speed, right, catering to the pace of each learner. Learners learn at their own pace, and also the depth of material that we all have to do advanced kind of topics in certain areas, right? And the answer would be no, right? And can we have more options, for our learners, so that, each one can find what's suitable for them, based on the brain capabilities that they have. And learning style is a fixed characteristic of an individual, and that's not true. So we all know that and believe that. So our brain is very much like a muscle. So with the right training and exercise, everyone can improve and learn better. That's it, right? Great. I've got some time for questions. I do see quite a few questions coming in. So it'll be really helpful, for all of you to give. I mean, I know, we might go through this every fortnight, but every topic's different. So always give us insights, on how to kind of like discuss a topic better. And so do give us some feedback if you can. And of course, if you're interested to find out more about our cognitive map profiling, and we're strong believers of that, I believe that every child, before you enter enter formal school, right, at 6, you should have a brain profile, right? And then you want to teach this to the, you want to help them succeed, and of course remediate the weak areas as fast as you can, right? But from 4 years up, you can get a cognitive profile of your students, and we can do it online, right? For some countries, we are still online, so you can run these profilings online. And if you're curious about our programs, you can use the link to access that as well. And we offer information sessions or complimentary consultation. And if you're interested in our next webinar, we're talking about an interesting topic. We're talking about the lazy brain, right? Because I think maybe with pandemic fatigue, right? I think everyone's getting tired, right? So help for lazy, is there really a lazy brain and uninterested learners, right? How can we inspire learning with all these added challenges, especially with all the pandemic, right? But to understand a little bit, is there truly a lazy brain? Kind of what is driving that lazy behavior? So we'll be exploring that. And if you just want to go into that sign up page directly, you can go through this link. All right, Ghazali, do you have any questions for me? Got some time? Ghazali, we can't hear you.
Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, so yes, we do. Let's start with a simple one. You started with each child or student has a unique learning style. Now, one of the participants were asking, how do you develop this profile of learning styles? Like in case it goes inclined to one direction and needs help in another, how would you help that?
If you Google, right, if you search on the internet, you'll find many, many surveys and quizzes. But I can tell you this has been challenged, right? So they actually have the kids fill in like, oh, do you think you're good in this? It's like again, my daughter, right? She will tell you she loves art. If you ask her, are you good at it? She'll probably say yes, right? I mean, like, what are we comparing with? And she's young, right? But is that something that she can go a long, long way? I mean, now that we are working on the area, I think, it's giving her more opportunities. But innately, right, I think it's not an area of strength for her. So there are lots of quizzes, but the self-description kind of like, you kind of think, so they have questions like, you prefer, you enjoy kind of like working in a workshop, like you like conducting experiments, right? So if you say yes, you might, give you a point towards kinesthetic, for example. If you say no, then it might be a point off. So is this kind of self-survey that's the most popular out there? And there's a lot of that. If you just Google, you get so many different quizzes, but that's really, really been criticized in terms of its accuracy. They're saying that no, it's not clear. People don't know, and I would tend to agree with that. I don't think we all know. Some of us think that we are very social, and then our friends might think, hey, you're not that social, right? I mean, what's the yardstick, right? I mean, yeah. So I think you can closely observe. I think apart from a real assessment, so, and obviously that's something we can do, within a school setting, also individually. I think that's the clearest way, where you actually have kids perform activities. So not that, Isabel will not tell you how she likes visualizing, but she actually has to visualize an activity. She has to recall visual information, and we're measuring her in the activity. So we actually get the activity out and have the kids perform it. So I think that would be the actual looking at the skill. But I think apart from that, very close observation. But observations could be hard. So you need to start clustering behaviors. You're saying that you maybe, say, okay, she's good with this, with this. And then, really looking at patterns, right? And then that there are the 5 broad areas, your visual, auditory, motor. It's kind of like your learning styles, yeah? And then you have your executive function, right? Which is more deep thinking, working memory, and emotional regulation kind of area. Yeah, so close observation. Otherwise, I think and an assessment, directly measuring, the abilities in the task.
So no self-assessment, just proper assessment to find out what
you're
really doing.
Yeah, you can do and self-assessment. I mean, it's free anyway. Just see if it's accurate for you, right? Like, but I didn't do any of that. I think so far from what I read, I think it's probably not worth for me personally. Yeah.
Okay, so one of your slides, you mentioned something about learners all learn, but at different speeds. So then we have a question saying that is self-paced learning good for the students' learning style? Would that be beneficial for them?
I think that's a great question, but I think it's a very, very complex question. Self-paced, what do you mean? Like, if I do not want to memorize my timetable, okay, my kids, they start teaching timetables at primary 2, primary 3, you should be fairly good at it, right? You should have fluency by primary 3 with your tables. And I'm pacing myself and I just don't want to do it. Like, at what point do you say that's okay? I mean, so I think that it raises a lot of questions, and that's why it's hard. I mean, I think educational system, it's hard, right? But I think fundamentally, I think the concept is that we all can learn, right? So I think the concept we all agree with, but it's just what is the pace? What is the expected, right? So say maybe I can stretch it into grade 5. Now it's grade 5. Is everybody going to be successful by grade 5? We don't know. But I think in genuine cases, so you then have to look at, is it a self-pace where I'm just ill-disciplined, or I'm just not motivated, I'm distracted by my computer games, without the family structure, or is it truly genuine? A child that is working 150% effort, but I just can't be on pace with everyone. That I believe we should be lenient, right? Because the moment you are not lenient, the effects on self-esteem, I think, is quite undesirable, where you're sending a message to the learner that you're a failure within the system. But what they have failed is within the pace, right? So I think kids shouldn't ever be made to feel like they fail if they have put in full effort, right? So, but as you can see, it raises questions as well. So I think, different systems are allowing that. But the very good AI, artificial intelligence kind of used in very good online learning systems, right? And we'll be, we're working with some scientists. So we're attempting to roll out some of these more into, educational kind of content as well. Where they really look at your answers and then they try and pace with your answers and scaffold you, right, with little baby steps, right? So I think that's really good. And it's hard for teachers if you have a class of 30, 20, even 20 kids, right, to scaffold to everyone, right? It's hard, right, in a practical manner. But I think with technology and artificial intelligence, yeah, we can have more successes in that and more kids can be successful. Yeah, I hope I answered that. Not sure if it's a great answer, but it's hard.
It's difficult to judge what self-paced is for an individual. Your second myth, I think, when you shared about the research on how learning styles-based instruction, is it effective or not, and it shows that there's no benefit to the student learning. I think a lot of questions come up from all the educators. Generally, most of them are asking like, okay, I'm an educator. Now you shared with me this research. So what can I do? I can't modify the way I teach to help the student. Then what helps?
I think that's a good question, right? I know actually this, I do this webinar with a bit of, I mean, I think the intentions of all teachers are great, right? But I think it is important to look at empirical, evidence, right? So I think if you are already practicing learning styles, kind of instructions where you're tailoring, I think it's great. But I think I will suggest that you do not tailor to a specific group of students. Like I said, it links very well to the multisensorial approach, right? You should involve everyone. So if you have a student whom you think is a kinesthetic learner, which you have been careful, maybe not to have things, to auditory, I think the idea is that we don't segregate that the kids in our mind, but we can continue to have the kinesthetic activities in our classroom, to have visual-based activities in the classroom, to have auditory-based. We just don't tailor it to a specific group of students, right? That is not useful, right? We just think of it because it's a brain-based approach. Now, it becomes different. A multisensorial supports learning in the brain. It is true. Just because you are firing many more brain areas, forcing them to connect and talk with each other, right? And the moment you have more connectivity, is a higher chance that retention is going to be more successful. So that's something that's encouraged. So I don't think you have to abandon all your strategies that you already may have developed, but you can, adjust and then implement it, across with all the kids in a more multi-sensorial kind of instructional approach. Yeah, so that would be my recommendation.
All right, great. So it's around 9:30 actually.
Yes,
so we are gonna keep this webinar on open for around 1 or 2 minutes so everyone can access the feedback form on the screen. But as they do that, shall we answer one last question before we go?
Yeah, sure.
We have one question about how can we help a child with visual impairments? Like we talk about visual spatial estimation and all that. How do you help this child with training? What training do we have?
You mean actual visual impairment like eyesight, or are you talking about visual processing kind of weaknesses?
I think it will be on the visual processing kind of area.
Okay, so now it's important to know that the visual brain is tightly linked to our spatial brain, right? So as a young infant, you are exploring spaces, right? So you're crawling towards things, you're moving away from things, right? So and when you're understanding space, you understand your own body space, the right, the left, up and down, right? So that's that close connection between the body and the visual system. Now, the key to improving any brain system is that it's like you want to improve your bicep strength, you must make your biceps work. It's the same theory. If you want to improve visual skills, the child must visualize and solve visual problems. So then within visual, there's a lot of sub skills. Are you talking about eye tracking? Are you talking about visual memory, right? The child may be able to have clear perception, but they cannot retain. Or are you talking about a spatial issue like the drawing that you saw, a child that cannot visualize a cube? So that's more a visual spatial issue, right? Are you talking about a handwriting issue, right? So that might be more eye-hand coordination. So it really depends, right? But the solution would be to give them exercises that's pertaining to that area. So if it's spatial, then you need to do spatial exercises. If it's memory, then you need to do visual memory exercises to then build up that part of processing. So that would be the general kind of guideline, right? In any brain area, you want auditory, you need to listen. Yeah.
So work on the areas that you're weaker in.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Cheryl. We come to the end of the webinar. Hopefully you have filled in the feedback form that's on the screen. You can continue filling up the form when the webinar is ended. And we'll see you in the next webinar, yeah?
Yes, hope to see you again. Thank you. We'll keep this on for a little bit more. Yeah, Ga, we just keep this on for a minute.
I will be sharing the link on the chat for the next webinar and the feedback form just for, oops. There. Okay, we'll leave the webinar on for around 1 more minute. If anyone needs to scan, our next the title of our next webinar would be Currently Help for the Lazy and Uninterested Learner. This would be definitely interesting for parents who think that their child are lazy. You always have to ask them to keep studying or do more work. Yep, okay. 1 minute's up.
Yep.
I'll see you guys in the next webinar.
Thank you. Bye, everybody. Okay, is anybody still answering Q&A? Sorry, I'm mindful that we are kind of cutting.
Nope, I think it's good.
No, good.
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Stay safe. Goodbye. Goodbye.